Thank you, Gene. Can you guys hear me? Yeah? All right, awesome. Well, first of all, thank you all for coming. It's so good to see all of your faces. I miss you guys a lot. Those of you who have me in class right now, I especially applaud you for like enduring this and class at the same time. Um, but again, my friends that I haven't seen for a long time, you guys, yeah, it's really heartwarming to see you, and I'm glad you're here. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Yeah, just gonna go ahead and probably get started. So yeah, Gene was saying that kind of in the middle of my residency, the quarantine kind of started up. This was March 13th or so, and I was working on something else at that time. And at that time, like I began to think like it just doesn't make any sense really to work on what I'm working on. And so I started a new project after, I don't know, a month or two of kind of floating in space, rudderless. It's called A Year of a Day. And I'm just going to read you this statement, and I'm going to show you some pieces from the work. Um, this is what I've come up with. I'm just going to read it to you. Uh, 2020 cannibalized hours and days. Dates and times grew arbitrary and joined the weekend in obsolescence. Fires raged figuratively and literally, socially, politically, and the virus ate as viruses eat. I look back on it. What have I done? What have we collectively done? A year of a day seeks to give answers to these questions should some future amateur historian come looking. We watched a year go by on various screens. We lost hours and sometimes whole days as the calendar and the clock loosened their grip. We remodeled our living spaces into cushions against emotional trauma. Some of us recalled old lessons, while others did not. Abandoned by our government, we self medicated, we worried, and we waited. Yeah, so it sounds dramatic. I'm sure it's maybe that dramatic for some of us, but it was that dramatic for me at least. Um, I started this work because I felt just amazed sometimes that I would wake up in the quarantine and then look at the clock and it was 6 p.m. or 7, and I'd ask myself, what happened here? Where did all of this time go? Who took it? Why is it slipping so quickly away? And so I just needed some proof, essentially, that this was actually happening. Um, and I began to suspect myself, like wondering, like, why is it? I was honestly worried about this. I was like, why can I not keep track of time anymore? Like, what is this? Um, and so I started doing research, like a little self-diagnosis, like looking at um, how we perceive time, each of us, and found some research on the fluidity of time. All of these things on the right side cause cause us to perceive time a little bit differently. Um, the absence of approach motivation, which is a fancy way to say like the loss of the drive to achieve goals. Watching a car crash, train wreck, a dumpster fire, all of those things cause time to kind of expand. Novelty, which I thought was kind of fascinating, causes time to expand when we're experiencing a novelty. Um, but then running against that are contractors, like being in an urban setting, or living with an expectation of all of this ending, like kind of waiting for a vaccine, essentially, causes time to contract. So there are a couple different factors running both different ways in terms of contraction and dilation, um, that might have caused some confusion for me. But anyway, I felt like it was out of control. I didn't feel like I had any way to um, hold time accountable in a sense. Like if you claim 8 hours just went by, like why? Like how did that happen? And so to take that back, I started making pictures, um, like just a lot of pictures. And I thought, Well, on March 13th, motion, like, where the world just absolutely stopped for a lot of people. A lot of people didn't stop, right? Like, that's the whole, like, people who think that the wearing the mask and staying indoors is a type of oppression. Maybe for them it didn't stop, but for me it absolutely did. And so I chose stop motion as the mode of expression for this work. Um, and I remember the moment. Maybe this is one of those 9/11 or Kennedy assassination moments, where you look back and remember where you were when everything stopped. And for me, it was in a car ride, a Lyft ride with Patricio. And this is how our conversation went. I was actually going from Mill Street to Peterson Brothers Plastics, to pick up pieces for other work that I was in the middle of producing. Um, and I was in the car right before the declaration of emergency on March 13th. And we were just having this conversation, and that was the moment. Uh, Patricio dropped me off and logged off of Lyft and, like, went straight home. And by the time I got home, the declaration of emergency had been declared. We went to the supermarket immediately, and it was absolutely being ransacked by everyone. The shelves were mostly empty. The lines were really long. Um, there was a feeling of kind of panic in the air that has since subsided. Um, but that's kind of why I chose stop motion. Is in sort of a reference to that moment, when stop motion, like, just happened, for all of us. So this is exactly how I did this work. I'd perform reconnaissance for days, which maybe means just getting high and watching the light uh, move over parts of the apartment. Um, I would, on the day I decided to make a piece, for example, I would adjust the tripod frame up, get a book, and just prepare to shoot. I would start taking pictures 20 or so minutes early, in a place where I knew the light would eventually pass, and I would shoot until after the light event. And so what's that mean? It could mean that I'd be shooting for an hour or 4 or 5 hours per piece. And then the editing of all of that would then consume the rest of the time in a day. So essentially, each piece represents a single day um, that has passed, which is helpful for me because now I can count them. And I would just load the stack of stills into Photoshop, animate them, and export them. And now I'll show you some pieces. And they're meant to loop interminably. This is a still from kitchen floor. This next piece is an example of what happens if you wait too long to make a piece. It's actually the most comforting piece to my mind, that I've made comforting for me, um, because it's one thing to have proof that the planet is spinning, but it's something else to know it's also moving along through the seasons. Um, the light event that I was trying to track with this piece was in one very dramatic place, right at the outside corner of a wall in my kitchen, and I waited 2 weeks. I watched it too long, and it moved off to one side. So this is the piece. A big event that happened this summer was the super derecho, and it's like that's the name of the storm that came through. You guys that live on the north side, maybe you had some serious damage or saw some cars that had huge branches fall on them, etc. Um, but it's something I'd never heard of, which I thought was exciting. Something novel um, happening here in the middle of the summer, and so it hit down in Pilsen as well. And so I just kind of opened the front door of my building and stood there. The wind and the rain blew in, but I made several pictures, or a video, I guess, of the wind on that day. And maybe this isn't so uncommon in Chicago. Maybe you could kind of see this thing at any time, or this phenomenon. But I'll remember it as the time during the quarantine that a super derecho came through and bent the branches horizontally. I looked it up, and super derecho has only been a thing. Well, it's been a thing a long time, but it was only named in 2010, so it is kind of a newly defined storm. Um, Sean gifted me in grad school. Gifted me a pothos. It was just a stem. And so for those of you that aren't familiar, I think all you guys are pretty familiar with this. Like a pothos is like an indoor climbing vine. Um, and spent a long time looking at it and getting to know it. um, Seeing the way that it's been sprouting new leaves and twisting in new directions and kind of following sunlight. Um, so I spent, as you can see here, 2 days with it, just shooting it, watching light events touch it and move around it, and seeing it respond. Those of you that have had me in class or have heard me talk about walking, this next piece, I was thinking a lot about Bruce Nauman, who you guys, if you haven't heard of him, was a very influential conceptual artist in the late 60s, who after his grad school experience found himself, unable to know what to do next. Didn't really have any ideas for work, um, and so did something really radical. he taped down a square in his studio and filmed himself walking around it, around its edge in an exaggerated way. Um, and that's what launched him into fame. His thesis was that if it happens in the studio, it must be art. You know, whatever happens there has to be the thing. Uh, and so I made this piece with that in mind, and it's just in my studio, looking down at my workspace. Yeah, the light that's on me now is that the same light. Um, and making this work, especially this piece, helped me to feel a little bit less guilty. Like you go into your studio sometimes, if you have a studio, and you, you might find it hard to make work or do anything. And so just looking at the space where I should be doing something, and filming the day passing over that space became the work, and kind of erased my guilt for not sitting there editing pictures or writing. Um, and so I began to wonder, like, what did the others do? Because this isn't the first time something like this has happened, right? It's happened a lot during the course of history, usually like 100 years apart. There was what they called the Spanish flu. And I don't know if any of you are looking at or can see the camera, but I'm reading, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. Let me see if I can get this in the light. I'm reading this book called The Great Influenza, and it's by a guy named John Barry. And basically, I've been reading this during making this work. This is an ongoing project, so I'm still doing some research just to try to find out what people did, um, and how they coped. And so I've gone through and announcements or advertisements that should look really familiar to everybody. um, and I've also found a lot of ads for snake oil. In this case, it's beaver oil, just as an example. So this is an ad for castoreum. Um, Barb, especially, I don't know if you've heard of this before. The castoreum is literally the expressed anal, like liquid from the anal glands of beavers, and people would use it as a topical ointment to soothe aches and pains. And some people have gone so far as to ingest it. Um, you do you at that point, but it's supposed to be good for cough and everything else, rheumatism, neuralgia, lumbago, and here the flu. Rub in and inhale. So rub in your skin and inhale it, um, and so on. Chlorodyne is another one that I found that people were trying to sell at the time. Um, Chloro should sound familiar to you guys if you've been watching the news about, especially about cures and things. Chlorodyne is a really juiced up way of saying opium. It's just opium. And so you have opium lozenges, you just pop it and you're fine. Obviously it's opium, so I mean, yeah, you're fine. um, Good for all kinds of things, but especially here on the right, influenza, asthma, bronchitis, diarrhea, stomach stuff, everything, whatever ails you. um, yeah, and so I was just kind of drawing lines, I think, between then and now, and what can possibly happen as people believe some of the things they hear. So peddling snake oil during a pandemic is just a thing apparently that has happened before and is happening now. And I found when I was doing this research, my frustration was just kind of growing and growing. It's like, are you serious? Like, how is it possible that we're falling for this again? um, or that so many of us are. um, Hydroxychloroquine. Um, this guy, you can't make this shit up. Like, his name's Palmer, I think Clive Palmer, and he has run spoiler campaigns in Australia, trying to steal votes and stuff from the bigger parties, and so he's just another millionaire. And so he bought, how many, 32, almost 33 million doses of hydroxychloroquine, and then advertised it like this. So this is kind of what a modern day chlorodyne ad might look like. I just thought this was kind of great. People believing what they hear, drink bleach and shine UV lights in your body to try to zap the virus. I don't know. All that's fine, and that's what we're dealing with. But what did people do is my bigger question. What did they do with their time so I could then know what to do with my time? Um, we're not going to talk about the Sedition Act or the war happening at that time, but the Grand Piano Company, for example, would urge you to buy a Victrola to pass the time at home. So that would be, maybe the video games. Like if you have a Nintendo Switch, like you can't buy one now. Like they're just not available. Um, and the PS5's coming out, and their VR headsets coming out, and they're all going like hotcakes. Bell Telephone at the time, it's kind of a new thing, and so maybe it's just people who are in quarantine are not isolated if they have Bell Telephone. And here we are on Zoom, having our Bell Telephone conversation. Like it's another echo in history. All right, so PS4 advertising a way to stem the tide of the virus. Um, Play video games, stay home. And I'd be curious to know, like, later on, what you guys are doing, like outside of your art practice or outside of anything else. Like, what are you guys doing? How are you passing your time? Wayfair was a company that was losing money for a long time, and they turned a profit this year for the first time in years, because we're all remodeling our homes. And I'd be, again, curious to know how you guys have remodeled your homes. Not if you have or if you haven't, but how you have. What's changed about your personal spaces. Um, Artificial plants. I have this is part of my Halloween costume. I have a big artificial, maybe you can't see it because the sun is shining so brightly, but it's a 5 foot tall fake banana tree that I bought just for this call. To give off a sort of No, I've been on this island for 7 months. Haven't seen anybody. That my companion washed up on shore. It's really chilly here, but also tropical. You can kind of hear maybe the waves crashing and the birds chirping. I went all out. But yeah, I mean, fake plants, real plants are all big things people are doing. And so, as an answer to that earlier question, you know, what did we do? The answer I've found is we watched whole days go by on screens. Like essentially, like if someone were to come to me in 100 years or come to this work in 100 years somehow, um, that's what I would tell them. I would tell them that we woke up and looked at our phones, maybe looked at Twitter or Instagram, and then went to work in the other room, and then after work moved 5 feet and watched Netflix until X time, until we went to bed, where we checked Twitter one more time or Instagram one more time before we passed out. Maybe those among us with more, I don't know, I don't know what, um, read books if you could focus on a book at that time. But um, yeah, so to affect that, I decided that installation had to be a part of this work, and so it's a site. What's at Little Street right now is a site-specific installation in that space, and this is a SketchUp from that. So I have two stills on the wall from GIFs that you've seen today, and a little table that I bought, like a very Wayfairy type table, like a faux modern one made of wire, uh, and a fake plant, another an areca palm. So not the same fake plant, not two banana trees, but we've got a areca palm too, and then the diptych from the super derecho on the other wall. Um, and so this is the one of the installation pictures from the show. I chose a digital picture frame to show a video that I made. Maybe I can post that somewhere. I didn't decide to show it here today because it's 5 minutes, but essentially I took old footage from NBC and BBC back from 1918 and put together a video where nurses are showing the audience how to make masks from cloth and what to do in order to avoid influenza. And then there's a long series of pictures of giant crowds together. And it finishes with a person reading a newspaper that says, we have no idea how this thing is spreading. And then the person in disgust, throws the paper away. It's just kind of a way to like reflect my like frustration that, this has all happened before. And apparently many of us haven't learned or haven't had a chance to study this. This is a close-up of that installation. There's that little table. And so that video is playing on a picture frame, the conveyance of memory. And the book right below the picture frame is The Discovery of Slowness by Sten Nadolny. I know that most people probably haven't read that book, and I just left it there as a sort of Easter egg in the show, kind of a key to, I don't know, to decipher it in a sense if you don't really know what the show's about. There is wall text, but if you skip that, you might be a little bit lost. Essentially, the book is a character study of John Franklin, who was a real person. He was an explorer, and I don't want to say afflicted. I think afflicted's the wrong word, but he's in his character. He's got Langsamkeit, which is a German term that originally referred to a mental slowness. And the book, like the real John Franklin, didn't have this. The real John Franklin was just a conqueror type guy, imperialist who was so bland that it provided a perfect blank canvas for the author to infuse that character with something interesting, like a slowness. And so the main character perceives the world with intense slowness, doesn't respond on time to stimulus in a sense. Things happen, then he doesn't notice. So the slowness is painted as a virtue here, where a slow person can afford to wait because they have to. And so this character achieves a different suite of victories and ultimate defeats. If you're familiar at all with John Franklin, you'll know that after fighting, what did he fight at? Copenhagen and Trafalgar, I think. He did a few Arctic voyages, and he went with 2 ships, and they were both lost. For 15 years, no one knows what happened to them. Until they started finding pieces of the boats and skeletons and notes and things. But it's kind of a hint to the whole show that it's about time perception. So their installation view of the pieces on the wall. I just used nails and magnets. Ironically, talking about slowness, I ordered frames for them, and the frames got here really late, like after the show was installed, and so I just decided to put them up this way, deal with it. Yeah, slowness, right? This is another SketchUp view of the opposite corner, where I planned anyway to install shelving and 2 TVs. Showing these videos, so I didn't just put stills in the show. I tried, in a sense, to put as many different screens in the show as I could, to reflect the many different screens that we all look at throughout our day. So TVs are there, and that's the installation view of these 2 TVs. I chose to install institutional televisions. These specifically are prison TVs. They look like they're from the mid 90s, right? Those old phones that you could see all the inner workings of, and you were absolutely in love with them, and then you had them, and they just became phones. But the idea is that you won't be able to smuggle anything in if the casing is transparent. Yeah, and that's just a touch that you also wouldn't really know unless you've either been to prison or are told that that's where these TVs are from. It's just a small sort of accent about how some of us might feel about our apartments, or living in our apartments, inhabiting our apartments after months and months and months, and what could be much longer. You start to feel like, man, um, I'm stuck here in a sense. But they're super nice TVs. There's an underground market right now. They're great for gaming, apparently, or retro gaming, and so people buy them up. They're only like $80. What's really cool about the space, the thing that I like, it's a nice little touch, is that there's a window facing south, and every day this beautiful light passes over the space and washes over it. So I'm thinking about, before the show ends, going back up and making a piece, just standing in the gallery space with the tripod up, and making a piece of this light passing over the show itself. Just because the window is so nice. And so what's next for this work? It's on view right now in a show that's traveled, called Making a Way. Sean's also in this show. It's at the South Bend Museum of Art's website, and then Salem State University as well has it up. And then, as Gene said, it's up in the second floor gallery space at Lil Street. If you get a chance to pop on by. A little bit of bad news about that. I had a phone installed with a charger. It's an old phone that could no longer, like an old Chinese phone that can no longer be used in this country. And it was installed, and it had the piece of the self-healing mat looping on it, and it was stolen almost immediately. So it's like long gone. And I have this kind of crawling creeping worry that maybe some other stuff might get taken, if by the same person, but good on them. Essentially, my thought is if they need it, then they need it more than I do. So cheers. Um, I'm going to be photographing more winter light pathing, small environmental gestures out the window. Um, and then perhaps a working from home video is in the works as well. This project will end when quarantine ends. So as long as we are in a state of emergency, um, or there's no vaccine to the coronavirus, I will be making this work. And I've found it's a kind of a great way to pass a day. It definitely does do what I hoped it would do. It it helps me kind of take back the time that seems to be either flying by or crawling by. It gives me some measure of control over time. And I have the camera to thank for that. And yeah, just going to take it a day at a time. Okay. Yeah, that's it. That's the work that I'm, and that's on display. So thank you. Yeah, thank you
Yes.
for listening to me.
Thanks so much, Levi. Trying to do little claps so that no one's audio
Oh
peaks.
yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much. That was really great to see. And even though I've talked with you about this work significantly, your presentation was really illuminative, and in the compilation of all of the like past and present material that's been like produced surrounding COVID and surrounding influenza and all this like ephemera that is created about this stuff. And so to see that all compiled really amplified my experience of the work, and I think made it just like really grounded and heavy, but not in a way that bummed me out more than I already am bummed out, but in a way that felt really important. Yeah.
I don't know.
So that was significant.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I didn't mean it to be like too heavy or too like depressing or anything, but at the same time, like looking back, like I couldn't find any work about influenza made by an artist at that time about influenza, like in the moment. And I realized, back then, like 650,000 Americans died from a virus that originated here and we brought to Europe, and so maybe it was too close, maybe it was too heavy, maybe it was too dark, I don't know. But I don't know, like I think now there's a lot more work being made about it, but I guess I felt like I had to make something.
Yeah. So we'll kind of just open up to Q&A now. If anybody, I'll kind of get us rolling, but if anyone has questions, feel free to type them in the chat. And if you prefer to unmute yourself, everyone can do that and ask their question with their voice too. That's perfectly fine if you want to chat more. But something kind of off the bat that I was thinking about this morning, Levi, that I wanted to ask you about is just that. So I really love concise art that says so much with so little. And I feel like this work really does that in a very powerful way. And for the exhibition specifically, I feel like you've created such a like potent but also subtle tension in the air, because the space feels incredibly calm and airy and open and bright. And then the longer you're kind of like looking at materials, the more it's all artificial, and there's all these like screens and mediated experiences of nature. So I guess, I mean, I feel like I also know the answer to this, but maybe I want to hear about it more from you. It's like, are you trying to deceive us or comfort us with that space?
Great question. Yeah, so during install, people were walking through and everything, and what they kept saying was what I really wanted them to say was like they're like, oh, this is so comforting, it's so nice to be in here. And so what I tried to do with the space was essentially do what we've done with our apartment, and what I through looking at the internet every single day of my life, getting the sense that everyone else has done that too. That you've essentially insulated yourself. You've created your own psych ward, like one that's just perfect for you. It's like a personalized one. And so that's what I tried to do with the installation, in a sense, is make this like ultra comforting place where it becomes apparent after a little while that it's meant to be ultra comforting. Like, it's like, it's a built comfort. And is it real? Is it, who knows if it's real, but is it necessary? It feels necessary. And I don't know if anything else matters, in the moment. And so I'm not trying to deceive anyone, but I am trying, like that like kind of slow burn where you start to look around again a second time and think, man, it's actually a little bit like a little bit heavy, a little bit, artificial, or institutional in a way. Like, that's fine.
Yeah, I know that you are too sweet to ever deceive anyone, but I still wanted to pose that question because that is the experience of being in that space. It feels incredibly calm and domestic, but also kind of cold or clinical, but like it's that in between space. It's like the IKEA comfort section where you're trying to make your life feel good. You pose the question, I think rhetorically, but I want to kind of change it to be not rhetorical, about like, what did everyone do and how have you changed your space? Not if you've changed your space, because I know you have, kind of thing. So I would love if everybody just wrote some of those in the chat. Like, what have you been doing? And how has your space changed? How have you transformed your space? And while people are maybe typing that, I will say, and I think I've shared this with you already, but the thing that I have been doing to comfort myself is watching all of ER from start to finish since March. And I'm on season 11 right now, I believe. And I've watched, there's like 20 something episodes in a season, and they're like an hour long. So that's a ridiculous amount of hours that I've put into watching ER. But I think the reason for that is it felt like reality. It felt like the reality that I like missed. It was like people are together and they're talking with one another in the same space. There's no cell phones or screens really, like, in that world. It's like our world, but it's just removed enough from our current reality that it feels like distant enough for me to get into. And then the way my space has changed, I have gotten some plants.
You have a new apartment.
Well, I got some plants in my new apartment. I was just going to say my spaces have changed in terms of plants and cohabitation with my partner, who I wasn't living with prior, who it just became, we were on the track, but it became so necessary to move in together during this time, because it was like impossible to navigate intimacy in this space. So let's see, Sean said rearrange to create separate workspaces. Oh yeah, that too. Everyone has to have their own separate workspace. Complete living room makeover, says Barb. And now I make my bed every day. Oh yeah, I make my bed every single day, which I never ever used to do. That was not a practice I was really cared much about. Chelsea bought 7 new plants.
Yeah, the forest.
Ian, I changed apartments. The one I was in was just a place to flop, since I was going to spend so much of my time out and about in the city. Once it was clear that I was going to spend more time working and living at home, I decided I need to find a new home that feels cozy. Larry stacked up books so that there is a risk of them falling over on me.
All right, now that's dark.
Just making your space precarious. Let's see, I'm just gonna keep reading these. I think they're fun. Michael says, we got a puppy. I bought tons of
Oh,
workout equipment. We
Penny.
redid all our closets so that there's cool track systems and everything is all cute and perfect and organized. I've bought a lot of new storage pieces. I've got a sit stand desk, which is something I'm desperately wanting since I work from home. We also bought tons of plants, spending way too much money. George says, redecorating the space with artworks that I can stare at for a long time and continue purchasing video games. Moving my writing desk by the window for sunshine. Blew a bunch of money on new furniture and rewatched old sitcoms. I assume that's something that you've also been doing, Levi.
Oh yeah, yeah, yes.
That one came from inside your house.
It really did.
Lots of Animal Crossing, uprooted to the West Coast. Didn't really have a place of my own as I'm living with family right now. Strange floating here still, but I have my cats and build a fire nightly. Oh, that's nice.
That's awesome.
Reading Jurassic Park. I didn't know that one could read Jurassic Park. Could not sustain any activity for a period of time. No clear idea of how time passed. Things that used to be valid and viable pastimes proved impossible. Not so much lack of discipline as lack of rationale. And so much crafting. Those are great. Thank you everybody for sharing that. I feel like that was actually, because I wanted to hear that answer, and I think you did too by posing the
I
question.
did.
And
Yeah.
and I think hearing those taking online classes, great. We've got tons of those at Lil Street, particularly in the photo department. But yeah, I think hearing those, similar to your search for like wanting to know what people did in the past when this happened, it's like you're trying to seek comfort of some sort and some kind of like, how am I going to get through this? So like hearing from everybody else about how they're getting through it, one makes me feel more comforted that like we're all having a hard time. But I think it also, I lost it. Maybe that's all.
Oh
I think
yeah,
it's
yeah.
just,
I mean,
it feels like,
I
yeah,
guess
we're searching for comfort in one another in some ways.
yeah. I mean, I suspected some of this, but at the same time, my intention was to like kind of just in the installation show my impression, like what we did. You saw what Savannah said. Like this is what we've done. We've blown a ton of money on revamping this place to make it palatable for us to be here long term. And so I was hoping by showing my like microcosmic impression that it would then resonate more broadly.
Absolutely. Yeah, and if anybody has any questions they want to chime in with, please feel free. I'll try to leave some space for that. Leaving space.
I was wondering, Levi, if you could talk a little bit about kind of your decisions between varying the frame rate from piece to piece. Like in some of them,
Yep.
it seemed really clear, like the square piece, that like the frame rate was more spaced out and a little bit more jittery versus some of the pieces where that frame rate's a little bit more smoothed out.
Yep. I'm glad you asked that question. So during export, I export both GIF files and MP4s out of Photoshop. And I found when the sessions, for example, of taking pictures get up into like the 4 or 5 hour range, that many files, over 1,000 sometimes in a GIF, they're just impossible for me to show. Like it represents a failure on my part to navigate the technology in a sense. Like I don't know how, for example, if anybody has any advice, I'd gladly take it, to show massive GIF files online at the native GIF export frame rate in Photoshop. It's so smooth, and that was part of what inspired me to keep going, was like the very first exports that I made on projects or pieces that I didn't show here. I saw how smooth they were, how calming they were, and I loved it. And so in lieu of that, I've shown online what you can see are MP4s because they're so small and unfortunately much faster. I have played with, well, the exports in the MP4s are at 10 FPS. just an attempt to somehow get closer to that GIF native frame rate, but it's not the same. It's still faster, and once you dip below 10, it starts to become jittery and jagged, like very noticeably. So yeah, it's not intentional, so to speak. But I'm still like fighting that battle. Any advice from anyone who's used to exporting big videos? Michael, that would be great to hear.
Yeah, I
I
think
don't know anything about exporting GIF files. Sorry. Oh, although you might want to look at Adobe Media Encoder if you're like as a video export, because that can get you really cool stuff.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, but yeah, sorry.
I think that, I mean, that also just brings up a good point that, like, I mean, we have to think about different ways to disperse our work. I know you and I even talked about, like, does a physical exhibition of this work even make sense? Like, is anyone going to see it? What's the purpose? And in the end, like, you know, I think it's nice and it makes sense, and I think it fills the space with something for the people who are in the building, and has this moment of like going up the staircase, and then you enter this like calming, comforting space that you've tried to create for people. But yeah, that is just something to think about, is like, you know, adapting to like new technology. That's been a huge conversation that we've been having a lot lately in terms of teaching online. And your work is like in the process of adapting itself to fit the means of dispersal right now.
Yep, exactly. I need to catch up.
George says the work is really therapeutic. Wish more people could see it. Shared experience. Yeah, and perhaps one day that you will figure out a way to like have that huge GIF file on the internet. But yeah. Something you said that I thought was interesting, or kind of when you're describing like your statement for the work is super poetic in a way. And I had this interesting experience the other night where my partner and I we listened to actually this play put on by this theater in Chicago called Theater in the Dark, where they perform plays in person. They would do this. They perform plays completely in the pitch dark in the theater, and it's a really like auditory experience. And so for right now, they're doing it over Zoom, and they have like very high-end audio equipment that they're using. And they suggest to everyone who tunes in that you turn all the lights off in your apartment and you just like listen to this experience. But the play that they're doing at the moment is War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, which has been adapted, you know, a million times in different ways. But it was originally written towards the end of the 1800s about like a Martian invasion on Earth. And so the play that they've adapted and written is set in Chicago and Southern Illinois in October of 2021, so a year from now. And it was such an interesting experience overall. I highly recommend it to anybody. It's playing, I think, through November every night if you check it out online. But there were things about your writing that reminded me of like the writing adapted about H.G. Wells, and this kind of like reflecting on the moment, and your need to like document this moment for posterity, document how the days passed. And I was this morning actually browsing around on your website and saw your quarantine blog, and some of the writing in there also feels, you know, the way your statement feels, where it is poetically written, but it's so heavy with emotion. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about the need to document for posterity's sake.
Yeah, what is that need? You know, why do we feel that? It's, yeah, I just have the like this kind of innate, I don't know if it's innate or like sub something. I don't know if it's subconscious or it's a fundamental sense that that we're living in an absolutely novel time that's been marked for, you know, members of a few different generations. Like everyone that comes out the other side of this will bear this mark. Like it's just going to be there. There's not anything we can do about that. So I guess now in this moment, I felt like I had a choice. It's like I could just sit and endure it, or and try to like flail against like a structureless existence, or take some measure of control back, doing the one thing that I've gone to school to do. It's just not, I'm not going to make any money. That's not the point. The point is to gather, to try to like gather a few reins back into my hands and make something in this moment. Not, it is for me. I mean, at the end, it is for me. Like I think I mentioned, like I needed it. I needed time to restructure itself. God damn it. Like, I needed it to like just form up again for a little while. Or give myself an activity that would automatically do that. And as a, photography is just, it's interesting that you call it photography when it has so much to do with time. Like, of course you're drawing with light, but aren't you also drawing with time? And so I needed some kind of expression in a sense to illustrate, this, each one of these videos is a whole day condensed into seconds, and that's exactly what I felt, in that moment, was that my whole days were just like, I would blink my eyes and it was over. And maybe there's some lament in that, but there's also some awe, that it could possibly happen, and some fascination. So while the quarantine has been rough on the pocketbook, it's been an absolute bounty of time to get my ass back into the studio and do something with that. And so I look at the camera now as a motivating force. It's something that I can rely on, to sort of, I don't know, take time back. And hopefully I look back on that, speaking of posterity, and think, wow, during that time, I was actually able to do something. I was actually able to like make something. And it might not mean anything. I mean, frankly speaking, anybody can do this. I mean, I gave you the recipe for the process, right off the bat. But that it's happening now, I think, is the one thing that grounds it in some significance, at least for me.
Mm. Thanks for that. That was a wonderful answer to my question. Does anyone else have any questions? Feel free to voice them if you would prefer. Leaving a little extra space for the time of typing. I wonder too, so this is conversation. Please feel free to keep typing your questions. But as somebody who's, your practice prior to this has so much hinged on walking and roaming the city like freely. And I wonder, if that part of your process feels like something that has fundamentally changed, or if you're still engaging in that work in some way, but it's not the work that you're showing right now, or that you're even really looking at right now, maybe just a practice that you're still doing. Just curious about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I still am. I'm actually working on a piece, or a whole body of work now, that I shot in one day this summer, called Blood Walk, where I found a trail of blood in my neighborhood, and I was on the way to get groceries and saw it, and then went back home, got my camera, and then followed it to the furthest point back that I could follow it to, and then I photographed every drop of blood that I could find all the way to someone's house. ended up being about a mile and then 300 something pictures. So, someone dropped 300, splashes of blood on the ground over a mile. And so I'm speaking of writing, I am doing some writing for that work, and still working with how I want it to look. And I'm certain that I want to ground it in walking a mile in somebody's shoes and empathy, in a sense, and the limits of empathy. And so I'm still doing that, but the thing that ties that work and previous work and this work together is duration. I, focusing just on the idea of the walk, for me is kind of like missing the forest for the trees. It's kind of about this work that looks at time itself, and takes time as its material. So I think it's still there in this. It's just I'm moving around my house a little bit, and not so like far afield in the world, but the duration's still there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for sharing that. Any other questions for today for Levi?
Well,
all right.
thank you guys so much for coming. It's so good to see you all. Thank you for showing me your kitties and your puppies. And I miss you all.
Great. Thank you so much, Levi. It was wonderful to hear more about your work, and I'm very glad that this exhibition got up. And please feel free to check it out if you happen to be near Lil Street. And thank you all for joining us from all over the place. Really appreciate it.
And thank you for hosting us.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. My
Bye.
pleasure. Take care, everyone. Have a happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.